Chapter 15 Mr. Dime's Final Act. What followed was the longest month of Danny Blackgoat's life. Every morning on his way to the cotton fields, Danny watched the raising of the United States flag over Fort Davis. He heard the bugle sound out the morning song. He watched as the flag climbed the flagpole all the way to the top. On the day the flag hangs halfway high, that is my day of freedom, he thought. Day after day he watched the flag, only to be disappointed. After a month, Danny decided to talk to Jim Davis that evening. I am tired of hoping for something that will never happen. I will stay at this fort till I die. The plan is off, he told himself one morning on his way to work. Danny heard the bugle call. I don't even want to look, he thought, kicking the dirt as he walked. Suddenly a rabbit sprinted across the path in front of him. Danny laughed. He remembered his grandfather's warning. Whenever you see a rabbit, Danny, watch your step. Rabbits like to laugh at our expense. Something is about to change. With a smile on his face, Danny glanced up. His eye caught the flag flying at half-mast. Yes, he shouted, pumping his fist and leaping high. Then he remembered that today must appear like any other day. He recalled the words of Jim Davis. To anyone watching you, nothing can be different about that day. Eat your meals as usual. Work in the fields as usual. Nothing can be different until everyone is asleep. That's when our plan kicks in. Danny gripped both fists tight and pounded his chest, but in a small and quiet way. His heart pounded with excitement. Careful, Danny, he told himself. Just to be sure, he looked at the flagpole one more time. He tried not to smile, not to celebrate. As before, the flag waved from its freedom perch halfway up the pole. Danny sat by the morning campfire with the prisoners as he always did. He sat as far away from Mr. Dime as possible. As he finished his coffee and rose to begin work, Danny took his hoe from the guard. Keeping a keen eye on Mr. Dime, he walked to the end of a long cotton row and began hoeing. Every few minutes he looked skyward, making sure the flag was half-mast. I have to stop doing that, he thought. Nothing can be different about today. The first sign of trouble came during lunch. Mr. Dime limped in from the fields. I hurt my leg, he said to a guard. I've never asked for any favors. Can I take the afternoon off? Just let me spend the rest of the day in bed. I'll be ready to go tomorrow morning. The guards looked at each other. Dime had not been a problem for some time. You must spend the day in the prisoner barracks, the officer said. He pointed to a soldier. You take Mr. Dime to the barracks and stay with him. Following a meal of brown beans, the prisoners returned to their work in the cotton fields. Danny knew that Mr. Dime could never be trusted. But if a guard stays in the barracks with him, what trouble can he do? He asked himself. An hour later, the guard returned to the fields. He left Mr. Dime alone, Danny thought. Mr. Dime is just pretending to sleep. Danny attacked his work, hoeing with a fury he had not felt since Jim Davis had his heart attack. The day crawled by. Something was happening back at the fort. He knew it. But he also knew he could do nothing about it. As the sun neared the top of the mountains, signaling the end of the workday, Danny's nightmare happened. Pow! Pow! 2 shotgun blasts exploded from inside the fort. The guards sprinted to the gates. Halt! Shouted the officer. Don't leave the prisoners. The guards returned, but several more gunshots rang out from the fort. Stay where you are, the officer called out. Gather the prisoners by the campfire. We will wait for orders. Danny joined the other prisoners, minus Mr. Dime, in their usual places beneath the clump of trees. The only enemy Mr. Dime has in the fort is Jim Davis, Danny thought. I hope he's safe. Danny wanted to dash to the fort, but he knew he would be shot. So as he had done all day long, he waited. Soon the officer left the campsite and entered the fort. Darkness settled. A guard built a fire and put a pot of boiling water over the coals. If we can't have supper, we can at least have coffee, he said. Everyone was quiet. Too quiet, thought Danny. Mr. Dime planned something. I wonder what the prisoners know. The officer returned and spoke to the guards in a hushed voice. Danny crept as close as he dared, trying to listen. He heard a few words he understood. Carpenter shop, killing, Mr. Dime. "No!" Danny shouted. The guards turned to him with wide eyes. They had never heard FireEye speak a word of English. Danny hung his head and was silent. "Don't be so stupid," he warned himself. His mind was racing. Somebody was killed in the carpenter shop. "I know Mr. Dime was there. He went after Jim Davis. That was his plan all along. First kill Jim Davis, then come after me." He looked up to see a group of soldiers riding to the prisoners on horseback. "Whatever is happening, it is very serious," thought Danny. The soldiers surrounded the prisoners. An officer Danny had never seen before stepped from his horse and moved toward the fire facing the prisoners. "Stand up," he shouted. "Now, make a line and keep a distance between yourself and the next prisoner. You will march in line to the barracks. Anyone who makes a move will be shot. That order comes from the fort commander. You will be under close guard tonight." "But what do I do tonight?" Danny thought. "The flag is already at half-mast. We planned my escape for tonight." The line of prisoners marched slowly through the gate into the barracks. "When do we eat?" asked a prisoner. "You will shut up and eat when I say you can," replied the new officer. "Take them to their beds," he shouted to the guards. The men sat on their beds while 6 guards with shotguns handy and ready to fire stood watching. 2 guarded the door. An hour later, Rick and Susan appeared. "I heard the men had no time to eat," Rick said to the guards by the door. "I brought some dried meat. At least they'll have something in their bellies. After all, this killing's not their fault." The guards took the bag and reached inside. "You don't have to look for a knife or gun," Rick said with a smile. "I'm just a delivery man. You all know that. I ain't causing no trouble." "We have to be careful," said a guard. "We already left a prisoner alone today, and look what happened." Rick rubbed his forehead, covering his eyes. While the guards examined the bag, he searched the room for Danny Blackgoat. When their eyes met, he quietly nodded at Danny, then spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Tonight is some night, huh? And it's not over yet." "He's telling me something," thought Danny. Something about tonight. If he was warning me, he would not be nodding. Tonight is still on. "Seems safe," said the guard. "All right, men," he shouted. "Stay where you are. We'll bring you supper." "My wife can make coffee. Enough for the guards and prisoners, everybody," Rick said. "I could use some coffee," the officer replied. "Sounds good to me." While Susan boiled water over the wood stove, Rick helped the guards pass out the meat. As he approached Danny, he looked over his shoulder. The officer watched him closely. "Here you are, FireEye," Rick said. "And no trouble from you tonight." Then he rubbed his hand across his lips and whispered, "Escape, Danny, tonight." Danny kept his eyes to the floor, nodding to let Rick know he understood. Soon the coffee was served, but no one spoke. Instead of the usual talking, the prisoners looked at each other without saying a word. Danny knew something was very different about tonight. They knew of Mr. Dime's plan, Danny thought, but they don't know of mine. Soon the prisoners climbed into bed for the night's sleep. A guard put the lanterns out. Darkness and silence settled over the barracks.